Thank you. I don't know, but for those few who have never heard about MMT and have never heard my presentations, let me give you a presentation, so a sort of basics. Otherwise, some people would not get the fundamentals. I apologize for those who are already aware of the basic principles. I'll try and be as brief as possible. 20 minutes, so dear Garibaldi soldiers, I'll be with you in a second.
So we need to understand something. In order to be able to follow whatever's been said, we have to get rid of the idea that the money is our value. This is one of the most incorrect things that they taught us. When we went to the supermarket and buy sweets, we always thought that the value was in our pockets and it was money to buy the sweets, but the value was actually the sweets. The theory underlying the modern money theory is that we need to understand that money is a means. It's just a means. In modern economy, the currency doesn't exist. Very provocatively, Warren MOSLER says the central banks and governments don't have money as such. They're just balances in the accounts of the central banks and the treasury, but it's no real value. And this is really important for us to understand. Can you hear the translation? Can you please let us know if you can hear? Can you raise your hand if you can hear the translation? Otherwise, okay, that's good. So how can this wealth be transferred? What's in it for people? Warren will explain something really controversial later on. We've always been used to think that imports are a cost, expense for the country, and exports are a benefit, because we can cash in money, we receive money. We're all happy because we think that this incoming money is wealth for the country. But it's actually not true, and Warren will explain it. When you're exporting goods, the wealth of a country is leaving. The country is going out. Wealth is not about money, but actually about services and material goods that we manufacture. And this is what really matters, and I do hope I can get this started again.
Ok, è importante, vediamo se riusciamo a... Anche perché giocando...
Well, playing on the idea of money...
Allora, vediamo se riusciamo a mandarlo e se riesce a funzionare. Ok.
Okay, it's coming up. Warren developed MMT. He was the first one. He thought it. He developed it and taught it to all the economists that now talk about the MMT. But it didn't come out of nothing. There are some historical fathers of the theory, like Friedrich Schnapp, that developed the chartalist theory. He was one of the first economists in the world who understood that for the state, the money issuer, the money doesn't have an intrinsic value. Other historical fathers are Keynes and the function of the government to create full employment. And in fact, it's not about the state, the money. The money is a code, but the real value is work and what can be produced with work. Money is just a code used to operate society. Let me make an example. The code, the remote control to open a gate. So the internal code in the remote control is like the money, but the value is the gate. The code is the money that you use to get the gate open. So the same applies to the money. ALAIN will be also mentioned about functional finance in the hands of the government, working in the interest of 99% of people, and today's finance, which works in the interest of 1% of people. When Godly, I will provide a very short overview of sectoral balances. When Godly told us how the different sectors work, who creates money, where money is being transferred, what can be done with this money, the real wealth can be created, and how does it work. Exactly. And we need to know that. Then Hyman Minsky, another important economist that need be remembered, he forecast the economic crisis much before it happened. And Warren is really very clear about this, contrary to what many people said in Italy that were wrong about Warren MOSLER. He has a banking background. He's the first man in the world, or better, the first economist in the world to be so critical about the banking world. He said all the financial world creates much more trouble than advantages. Charles Goodhart, he worked at the London School of Economics. I'm not sure he's still there. He said, we've been told public debt is a problem for 300 years, and it's not been so for 300 years. And in fact, even Morgan, the founder of the banking dynasty, said that the greatest wealth of a country is its public debt. And here you can see them as you met them. So let's talk about Italy very briefly, because we need to be clear about one concept. In order for the disaster to be overcome, the economy side, I call it the chemo economy. This is, and we're victims of that, as Alain correctly mentioned. We've been taught and convinced about things that are not true, which actually makes sense. Last night we were talking about one of the tragedies of the left and the unions is that neoliberals convince them surreptitiously about the principles used by predators to destroy the economy, because all left-wing people in Italy are convinced about budget balancing being important, and that we need to stick to the euro for Italy to become a serious country, and that we need to save money. Whereas another important MMT rule is that savings, the destruction of economy, it destroys the economy. There should be no savings, and Warren will explain this to you much better than I can. There must be a government guaranteeing services to citizens that must optionally save their money, only if they want to. But savings must not be an obligation or an anxiety for people, because savings create an aggregate loss. Italy used to be a happy spending country, and we kept saying, well, we have to suffer because Italy spent too much. And I've taken this data from the state treasury or accounting service. You can see the average of European countries that we measure against to when they say we're the pigs of Europe. The average is invalid. And you can see the Italian curve, which is sort of yellow-green. Since 1960 up to the 90s, Italy was well below the European average in terms of public spending. It's not true this country's been spending much more than the others, and this is confirmed by this, again, from the state treasury. Italy can be seen up there, always spends within the European average, and spends on public administration much less than France, less than Belgium. And this is something very important, again, from the state treasury. Look at the Italian public debt, which is the reason why it's higher than in other countries, but not Japan. But higher than other countries. This is the reason why this country, and you got to understand that very clearly, this country's got nothing. This is a poor country. We got nothing. Our agriculture is really ridiculous. No minerals, no gold. How could we get out of the war completely destroyed? We were a bit like Albania, without offending Albania, but we were Albania, and Italians were moving everywhere else in the world. So how could it happen that we've become the 7th world power on account of that public debt? Look, in 1998, it was much higher than it currently is. It was 132 of GDP, but there was no spread-related crisis. We were not the pigs of Europe. Why? Because we still had a sovereign currency. And this is another important thing. We get fed lies all the time that we spend too much. Italian public debt throughout the First Republic was a public debt that would dream nowadays. And it would be very close to Maastricht's parameters. We got an increase during the caretaker government, and it got much higher than later on.
In blu grossa è la spesa totale.
You can see total expenditure and revenue. The red is the revenue, the taxes. They say we have to reach budget balancing, but Italy, being the 7th or 5th world power, is a country where the state spends more than in taxes. And it's very evident, according to MMT, what the benefit is of a state providing financial goods net more than it subtracts to people in taxes. And look at what Economia and Finanza and Repubblica states. In the mid-90s, Italy, and this according to rating agencies, which are the ones that are now down rating us, and they're down rating our companies in our country. So in the mid-90s, they say Italy was a leading country in the EU in terms of economy. We had more deficit, more public debt, and more inflation than we have now. But what was the difference? So how can it be possible that this country is promoted by the same agencies that are now down rating us when we have more public debt in '94, more deficit and more inflation at the time? We did have the euro, the lira at the time. We didn't have the euro. And so much about inflation that will be dealt with in detail by Matthew. It's fun talking about inflation, as a matter of fact. These are data provided by the Italian Statistical Agency. Look at Italy of the 80s, 21.2% inflation rate, 1990-80. We showed this to Mario Monti without saying it's Italy, he would say that's Burkina Faso or Mali or Sudan, but that was Italy back in 1980. So this is a country, according to the economic principles of chemoeconomics, that should be desperation. Back in the 80s, Italy had 25% of household saving rates. It's the highest in the world. And that means that Italy, with 21.2% inflation rate, lived well, could save more than in any other country in the world. This is just to give you some information about inflation. Look at today's Italy, 2009. 9.9% inflation rate. Look at where Italian savings ended, 6.8%. They just declined from 25% average household saving rate down to 6.8%, with inflation almost down to zero. So let's try and go back to this. So we've been taught a number of false myths, like Italy spending too much, public debt being a burden for the country, but we actually know that public debt is only something that enriched our country, and then inflation rate. Let's go back to what money actually is, who manages the money and where. I usually like to make this drawing to explain what I'm talking about. This is Italy. There's well, these markers are really terrible. I can hardly find good ones. All countries have two types of wealth: one, financial health, and real goods, which are the ones that really count. So in all countries, there are two entities, one and two. The government, which means the public system at large, which, contrary to what we learn at school, is not the res publica. The government is not us. It's two totally separated entities, and they have to be so. It's fair and healthy for them to be separate. And then the non-government, which, just to make it simple, it's stay on. Please stay on the flip chair. So it's the businesses and households, all professions. We are the non-government. So we are the non-government. So the government has money and real goods. We have money and real goods as well, but we need to wonder who creates the money. How can we have financial goods net that can really help us promote the economy, boost the economy? And by this, I mean financial goods that have no corresponding and equal loss. If I go buy a pair of shoes, the person selling the shoes gain a financial good. When a bank makes borrowing, they create financial good, but you have it, but it's a net. It's not a net financial product. When somebody makes a lot of money and becomes rich, somebody else must have given that person the money. So that was the loss for that person. If somebody makes savings and money is subtracted from the circuit, it's a closed loop. Somebody is losing at the same time. So we're not supposed to move money from here to there. We all together at the same time must have a little more money in there, which is net. But who can create that if we cannot create money net? That money that will allow us to operate the economy of real goods. The only possibility to have net money in there is that an external container must provide some. And that's what the government's doing. The government spends, and by spending, it credits the money on current accounts, paying salaries or contracts, and so on and so forth. So the government spends and puts in net money into current accounts, but they do something else. They impose taxes, so subtracting money from here, and so puts money by crediting it on current accounts and applies taxes by draining current accounts. So what's the game we're interested in? We want to have 100 being put in this and 80 taken out, and 20 being left there. This is very good for the non-government sector. So it means that nobody here got deprived of 20. It's for all of us, can be redistributed and used to create real wealth. But at some point the government says, well, I put in 100 and take out 100. So what's left in there? Zero. We got zero in there. There's no net financial good, because because the government has to pursue budget balancing. Who's made the decision? It was made by ideologists, by people who developed a type of economy that's not right for us, but they convinced everyone. The other ghost that they fed us, that virtuous lies with balanced budget. But what does it mean? I spent 100 and I did take out 100. So how can that create growth? It's totally impossible. Budget balancing doesn't leave anything in there. And if we keep doing that for years and years and years, and it's become enshrined in the Constitution, it means impoverishing automatically all this sector that we live in. And if, as we've been told, the virtuous government has a budget surplus and so puts in 100 and takes out 150, so we're left at minus 50, and that's the destruction of the society. Warren says that it's not by chance that in America the two best known balanced budgets are the one before 1929 and during the Clinton years before the financial crisis exploded. So we really need to know that in there, if we really want to boost growth with net financial assets, we can neither have budget balancing or budget surplus. We have to have a good balanced budget deficit, because in this way we can create employment, infrastructure, and net liquidity that allows us to create goods and services. We cannot rely on banks, because banks don't create net money, net assets, and I will explain that later. If we guarantee that this system works, we can also guarantee that the government can then use taxes in a positive way in terms of cutting taxes, or if necessary, to make the system work better. And why? Because with this system, the government spends first and then taxes. Doesn't need to tax in order to spend. And this is the fourth fairy tale that we've been fed and taught. We must all pay taxes of this economicide, because otherwise we have no hospitals, we have no public services, and the government cannot spend if we don't pay taxes. That's the lie. It's counterintuitive. Warren says you cannot collect tickets at the stadium before distributing them. You first have to give the tickets before you spend them. So the government can play on taxes to help us all, while they're playing on taxes by increasing them and destroy all of us. Let me now come to my conclusions. Let me show this to you, because that can happen only if that gentleman, the government, is the issuer of its own currency. So it can play the game and use deficit spending, as we hope to, whenever needed, or on a permanent basis, as Keynes used to say. Can do that if they have a sovereign currency. Look at the situation, which is totally different. Now we have this government at the top, and we have another story here, which is very tragically different. We have a gentleman here called the European Central Bank, and we have capital markets here, other gentlemen here, and we have somebody else called government, and then we have the families and the enterprises, the businesses, the government's here. This is the non-government now. What happened? That the owner of the currency is called European Central Bank, that's the issuer of our currency now. And where does the money end to? It ends into the capital market. These are the people that hold our currency, and that government that used to be up there is now in the non-government sector. It's the same as us citizens. It's the same as us citizens. It's somebody using the currency. It's not somebody issuing the currency. So government uses the currency the same as all of us. So the Italian government must go on the capital market and borrow each and every cent they spend for companies and citizens. And this is a big problem. It's a big problem because they use the currency. They don't issue the currency, so these people decide interest rates by playing grotesque games. So when the government spends and taxes, must pay a lot of attention, because since they have to give back currency to the capital market and money that it doesn't possess and own, must pay a lot of attention, must be very strict in taxing and cutting services, because we have to give back the money to these people. But how could we end up in such a disastrous situation? Who had this a crazy idea of creating such a monetary monster? It's the first time ever in the history of mankind. It's 5,000 years we've had the currency. The first time such a system's being created, where the money issuer is a system of central banks and capital banks hold the currency, and the government is the same, is equal to the citizens. Who created that? And the people that we'll hear from ALAIN, and I speak Amato and Prodi, Delors, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I'm running late and I got so many things to show you.
Forse un minutino per farvi vedere un'ultima cosa, perché un altro dei...
I've got something else, another myth used to destroy us, and the ghost of unemployment. My PowerPoint disappeared. Was the technician?
Eccolo. Il mito della
The myth of unemployment. You know, Italy with the lira and a high inflation rate. We used to be very poor when the inflation rate was high. Good old Italy had a lot of unemployment. But look at the Italy with the lira, and unemployment always run below 10%. Well, of course, 10% unemployment rate is a serious problem, must be resolved. But it's not 40% like it is now, with 25 to 30% of youth unemployment. Is not even close to that. Italian unemployment went up with the arrival of the caretaker governments and technocrats, the austerity rule.
Altro mito che ci mettono nella testa, noi non siamo del lavoro.
We have no work flexibility. We need to destroy job safety to be richer. But let's look at the World Economic Forum, one of the top financial industrial groups. Look at Sweden. They have a labor market which is very regulated according to the World Economic Forum. Look at that, too regulated. So it doesn't work, same as in Italy. Look at Finland, too regulated. Look at Germany, you know, they keep preaching us we need to deregulate our labor market. They are too regulated as well. No good. And Switzerland, too regulated, too. Bureaucracy at the government doesn't work. So, and then our labor minister says this country, they're going to go bad because they have an extremely regulated market. They cannot be competitive. Look at the ranking of the Global Competitiveness Index. The most competitive one is Switzerland, Sweden, Finland, Japan, first to sixth place, and Germany. No, not Japan, Germany. So that shows that deregulating brings competitiveness. Look at this. All countries with a regulated labor market are more competitive. This is Italy. We have excessive regulation in the market, but we rank 43rd after Barbados, Poland, Tunisia, and Thailand in terms of competitiveness. Last but not least, this is the annual report of 2011 of the Bank of Italy. This is the best of the Eurozone. Take a look at this. Look at that. Which was the country that the year 2000 had the highest industrial production of all richest countries in Europe? It was Italy. Look at what happened in the end. We're now last but one in Europe, and the winner is Germany. ALAIN will tell us more about this, about what happened. Had we listened to them? This is an interesting document. This is by U.S. economists on the from the Federal Reserve System, so they're supposed to be experts. Not all of them, as Warren knows, but you know. Look at this, the way they commented on the euro from 1989 to 2002. The euro, it can't happen, it's a bad idea, it won't last. When Godley wrote on The Observer in 1997, members of the Eurozone were not only giving up their currencies, but also their fiscal freedom. Within the Union, government could no longer draw checks on its own central bank, but must borrow in the open market, the capital markets that I mentioned before. This may prove excessively expensive or even impossible. The budgetary restraint to which governments are individually committed will impart a disinflationary bias that locks Europe. Paul Kurtman, what happened is that by going on the euro, Italy in effect reduced itself to the status of third world countries that have to borrow in someone else's currency. The euro is a foreign country. It's not our own currency. It belongs to these people that have become our government. Last thing, and then I'll give the floor to the next. This is an appeal, a pledge to the country, the wealth of households, an international comparison. Look at all the richest countries in the world, US, Canada, Japan, Germany, France, UK, and Italy. Look at the financial indebtedness. We have the lowest indebtedness, financial indebtedness of all. Look at the assets. We are average among the richest countries. Look at real assets, which are the ones that count. We're the richest of all in terms of real assets. Look at the real wealth. We're the richest in terms of net wealth. 10,000 billion euros of wealth. The predators that you saw in the video want to destroy that and eat it up. My request is that we should try and understand how to send them all to hell and preserve our wealth, because this is democracy. Because if they're strangling you, as I see people next to me with this news of debt at their throats, you can't do anything. You can't even love people next to you. You're deprived of the right of being a human being. So let's work on it.